Do you really think you know how to love? That your romantic choices are conscious, mature, and free? The truth, and yeah, it might sting a little, is this. Most people don't love. They just repeat what they lived in childhood. And the scariest part? They do it thinking it's love. We grow up being told family is everything, even when that very everything taught you to shrink, to beg for affection, to normalize emotional abuse. And that's why, without realizing it, you keep choosing relationships that hurt you in the exact same way you were hurt back then. Different faces, same pain. Toxic love doesn't start in adulthood. It takes root when you couldn't even speak properly, when you learned that you had to behave to be loved. That crying was too much. That feeling was wrong. That your worth depended on how well you could please others. So you grew up carrying anxiety, low self-esteem, a bottomless hole no one could fill. We romanticize chaos because chaos is what we were given. And when peace finally shows up, you doubt it. You sabotage it. You run. Why? Because inside you still lives that child. The one who had to navigate emotional minefields alone. The one surrounded by toxic relatives, critical parents, broken promises, and absences that left wounds too deep to ignore. And so you grow. You gain freedom, autonomy, options, but you still choose what hurts. Why? Because it's familiar. Because your body learned to adapt to pain. Because your mind confused abandonment with love. And in that silent cycle, you begin to lose yourself until you believe that love is this. Fighting, pain, anxiety, doubt. But it's not. It never was. And you know that. Deep down, something inside you still craves. A love that doesn't hurt. A love where you don't have to beg for space. So here's the question. Simple but bold. How many more relationships are you going to enter? Trying to heal a wound that was never yours to begin with? It's time to stop romanticizing insecure attachment as intensity. It's time to stop confusing attention with love. You deserve a love that feels light. But to receive it, you have to look at your own story with courage. See what they try to hide. Understand what they never explained. Free what you locked away, just to belong. Because before you can love anyone else, you'll need to learn how to love yourself. Without fear, without guilt, and without trying to become who they expected you to be. It's interesting how almost no one notices this, but the styles of love we carry into adulthood, yes, the very ones that make us repeat patterns in romantic relationships, begin to form long before the first kiss. Way back in childhood, where those first experiences with affection, or the lack of it, take root. A child who grows up hearing things like crying is weak, or you need to be strong all the time, learns to suppress emotions, normalizes critical parenting, and unknowingly develops an insecure attachment style. This explains why, even years later, well into adulthood, we keep searching in others for what we never received at home. And the wild part? Most people have no idea this is happening. They just feel like something's always missing. Ever noticed how some people seem stuck in an emotional loop, constantly attracting the same type of toxic partner? That's conditioned emotional behavior at play. People who grew up with toxic family dynamics or emotionally absent parents often carry chronic anxiety into their adult relationships, constantly trying to please or shield themselves from abandonment. And that wounded inner child, they never really left. They're still there, behind the grown-up exterior, desperately trying to figure out why love hurts. And the answer? It lies in the way that child learned to love. Sometimes by begging for attention, other times by hiding just to stay safe. It's like trying to complete an emotional puzzle, without realizing the most important piece is still stuck somewhere in your childhood. That's why understanding your love style is so freeing. The moment you realize you've been repeating patterns, you stop calling it bad luck or karma, and start seeing it as what it really is. Unresolved childhood wounds quietly shaping your love life. Want an example? Someone with a controlling parent may become an emotional avoidant, running from deep connection because it feels threatening. Or they may turn into a chronic people pleaser, constantly performing for love, just to feel worthy of it. It's not about blaming your parents. It's about understanding that what feels like your personality is often just your survival strategy from the emotional environment you were raised in. And once you reach this point of awareness, a new kind of question starts to form. The avoidant is often seen as someone cold, detached, just doing their own thing. But the truth is, behind that distance lies a story built on uncomfortable silences, critical parents, and suppressed emotions. Growing up in an environment where there was no space for vulnerability, where crying was seen as weakness, and affection felt awkward or shameful, teaches a child to hide what they feel. They learn that the best way to avoid pain is to avoid people. And just like that, without even realizing it, they become the adult who runs from intimacy like it's a fire. What's most fascinating, avoidants often don't even realize they're running. They enter romantic relationships, but always keep a safe distance emotionally. You know that person who says, "I don't like getting too attached," or panics the moment someone gets too close. That's not personality. That's a learned emotional defense mechanism, molded way back in childhood. From the outside, it can look like strength, like independence. But inside, it's often just fear of reliving the emptiness they once felt with their parents. It's like building a beautiful house, but forgetting to furnish it. Everything looks perfect until someone tries to get comfortable. If you see yourself in this avoidant pattern, it's time to face a hard truth. Avoiding feelings is the same as numbing yourself to life. There is no love without openness, and there is no openness without vulnerability, even when it scares you. Pretending everything's fine while your heart is silently suffocating, that's a price too high to keep paying. Want a first step? Start here. Write down every day what you felt and what you try to hide. Read books like The Body Keeps the Score. Dive into somatic therapies. Face the ghosts you've locked in your emotional attic. Because as long as you keep protecting yourself from pain, you'll keep protecting yourself from love too. And some people, they don't idealize. They don't run. They just get disappointed again and again and again. The vacillator lives in a constant emotional push and pull. At the beginning of a relationship, they idealize the other person like a character from a romantic movie. Someone who's finally going to fill all the emotional voids left by childhood. But the moment something goes wrong, a colder tone, a poorly timed response, the spell breaks. Why? Because they grew up in unstable homes with unpredictable parents, where love had an expiration date, and abandonment was always lurking in the background. The result? They learned to crave deeply and to distrust just as fiercely. This attachment style is brutal because it looks like passion, but it's really panic in disguise. The vacillator opens up fast, but pulls back just as quickly. They swing between the high of connection and the fear of being left behind. And the more they feel like they need the other person, the more they resent that dependence, as if loving meant losing control. Makes sense why their relationships feel like a roller coaster, right? One day, everything's magical. The next, they're already thinking of walking away, just in case they get hurt, because the past taught them that love is risky and that getting attached hurts. To break this cycle, you have to stop punishing yourself for wanting too much and stop demanding perfection in return for safety. The vacillator needs to take a breath and face the truth. No one else is going to fill the holes your childhood left behind. That stings. But as long as you place the burden of constantly proving love on someone else, you'll keep living in anxiety. Start by watching your triggers. That sudden irritation, that fear of being forgotten, that urge to run when things feel too good. Because sometimes what looks like control is just your inner child still trying to survive in a world that isn't as unpredictable anymore. The controller often appears strong at first glance. They always have an opinion, make quick decisions, set firm boundaries. But behind that confident exterior is an exhausted soul, constantly on alert. Someone who grew up without emotional support, without real protection, learned that the world was too dangerous to let their guard down. So instead of feeling, they started commanding. Control became shield, a way to make sure no one would ever make them feel small, helpless, or invisible again, like they once did back in childhood. This kind of attachment behavior is more common than you think. The controller enters relationships trying to set the rules, predict outcomes, monitor every move the other person makes. But deep down, what they're really searching for is safety. They want to be certain they won't be betrayed, abandoned, or rejected, because they've already felt all of that, and they swore they'd never go through it again. But here's the twist. Control, over time, suffocates. What was meant to protect becomes a prison. They try to avoid pain, but end up pushing love away. And the cruel irony? When the other person pulls back, they feel exactly what they feared most: rejection. If you see yourself in this pattern, you might be tired of trying to predict the unpredictable, tired of needing to manage every detail, every reaction, just to feel safe. Maybe what you really want is to rest, to trust, to finally exhale without fearing everything will fall apart. But that takes courage. The courage to understand that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's humanity. And maybe what you've been trying so hard to control is actually trying to teach you something. Because while some people control, others do the impossible just to be accepted. And both are trying to survive the same thing: the fear of not being loved for who they really are. The people pleaser is the one who always says, "It's fine," even while swallowing their own pain. They read the room, track everyone's mood, adjust their tone, their words, their outfit, even their feelings, just to keep the peace. And no, it's not overthinking. It's survival. Those who grew up with critical or emotionally demanding parents learned early that love came with conditions. You were only loved when you acted the right way. So they became what everyone else expected. And somewhere along the way, they lost themselves. This attachment style is deceptively dangerous. The people pleaser seems kind, warm, empathetic, and they are. But they're also carrying chronic anxiety and a guilt so deep, it makes them question if they're allowed to take up space. They relate through fear. Fear of upsetting others. Fear of being rejected. Fear of causing conflict. So they keep it in. They absorb the frustration. They swallow the words. They tolerate what hurts just to avoid losing love. And then one day, they explode, and no one understands. But you never complained. Of course not, because they were taught. Those who speak up lose love. The way back. It starts with one simple and deeply uncomfortable question. How many times have you said yes when you wanted to say no? The people pleaser has to relearn how to listen to themselves. Start small. Set boundaries in safe spaces. Say you prefer something else for lunch. Cancel that plan you never wanted in the first place. Speak your truth, even if your voice trembles. Because every time you silence yourself to keep someone, you lose another piece of who you are. And while some people please to avoid rejection, others submit because they've been conditioned to believe they don't deserve more than what they're given. The victim doesn't see themselves as a victim. They learned far too early that love came with pain, and that to be loved, they had to stay quiet, hide, shrink. They grew up surrounded by yelling, absence, chaos, criticism. And in the middle of all that, they built a fantasy just to survive reality. They became the kind of child who had to create a different world in their mind, just to make sense of the one they were actually living in. Because when you can't change the environment, you change yourself until you forget who you really are. They heard things like, "You're overreacting. You're too sensitive. That's not a reason to cry." And slowly they learned, feeling is dangerous. Expressing pain leads to punishment or silence. So the only option was to adapt. Their world was unstable, emotionally suffocating, filled with toxic family dynamics, repressed emotions, unspoken expectations, and a complete lack of safety. In the absence of warmth, they built a parallel internal world, where at least they could breathe. Because in the concrete reality, what was called love came with fear. Now, as adults, they move through life feeling like something is always missing. They try not to disturb, not to cause trouble, not to be too much. They carry chronic anxiety, as if something bad might happen at any moment. Even when everything seems fine, they walk with low self-esteem and a quiet fear of rejection, abandonment, and being replaced. In relationships, they often submit, settle for too little, stay silent too long. They're often drawn to controlling partners because their nervous system recognizes that pattern. It's familiar. It feels like love, but it hurts. The cruelest part of all, the victim doesn't realize how unbelievably strong they are. To survive that much with so little emotional support takes immense strength, but that strength was used to endure, not to live. So life becomes a cycle of survival, trying to please, trying to be enough, trying not to be left behind, and in the process, accepting pain just to avoid the echo of an old abandonment. It's like living with an invisible collar. Anyone who tries to love them runs into a wall. They don't even know how to explain, but there is a breaking point, a moment when the body is done. The mind refuses to keep pretending, and the heart begins to scream for dignity. The victim needs to understand. What you live doesn't define who you are, but it explains why you feel what you feel. And only when you face the pain, raw, unfiltered, unapologetically, can the transformation begin. That takes a silent act of courage, saying enough, even if your voice trembles. Choosing to prioritize yourself, even if you don't know how. Choosing to protect yourself, even if you don't feel you deserve it yet. Because what once kept you alive has now become an emotional prison. And every prison has a key, even if it's buried deep under layers of silence and insecure attachment. Now tell me, after all this, are you really still going to keep calling love something that's making you sick? Are you going to keep blaming fate, luck, or your difficult way of loving? When deep down, you already know the root is way back there. In that childhood, you keep pretending didn't shape you? It's time to stop giving the past a free pass. It's time to stop accepting crumbs, just because that's what you were taught to settle for. You're not that child anymore. Now you get to choose. And every choice from here on out will either heal or repeat. So I'll ask you this. What are you going to do with everything you just realized? Are you going to pretend you didn't hear it? Save this video for later? Or are you going to look inward with courage and decide you don't want to carry the weight of what they placed on your shoulders anymore? Because if you made it this far, it wasn't by accident. There's a part of you, maybe tired, maybe just wounded, that's begging for emotional freedom. And that freedom starts the moment you stop searching in others for what your parents never gave you. So here's the deal. If this message hit you, if it made you think, if it showed you something no one else ever dared to explain, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe, turn on notifications, stick around, because this is just the beginning. There's so much more that no one ever had the courage to tell you. But I will, and maybe, just maybe, that's where your story finally starts to change. For real.